Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Voter ID is a contentious issue in the political landscape today on both the state and the federal level. The real question is, should voters in California have to show proof of identification or citizenship when they show up at the polls to vote on Election Day? Well, last year, Gavin Newsom passed a bill that said no. It said local governments across California could not require voters to show their IDs when they wanted to vote in person. But the Trump administration seems to be taking an entirely different approach. So, which one is right and how should we think about voter ID? We're going to get into all of it today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. Okay, so this is coming up because in April of this year, the House passed legislation officially making it into law that voters needed to show proof of citizenship in order to vote on Election Day. This is in line with what President Trump has wanted, and he passed an executive order earlier this year requiring the same thing. But this flies in the face of the stance that California politicians like Gavin Newsom and other leaders in our legislature have taken on the issue. So what are the arguments and how are we supposed to think about voter ID? The basic argument for people who are opposed to voter ID is that it disenfranchises certain groups who maybe don't have as easy of access to obtaining an ID. So the common argument will say that marginalized groups, people with disabilities, Black and Latino communities, or low-income communities may not have the same resources, access to transportation to the DMV, even just money to be able to pay for an identification card. And then ultimately, the argument boils down to saying that if certain groups can't vote because they don't have the money or they don't have the access in order to obtain that identification, that now you are denying them their rights, and thus you are discriminating against certain groups of people from allowing them to participate in our elections. Now, if that's true, that is brazenly un-American. In America, we all who are citizens of the United States and who are eligible to vote should be allowed to vote. We should be able to register and show up on Election Day and make our voices heard. So discriminating against any group of people would be against our core values. But supporters of voter ID are not saying necessarily that they want to keep certain groups from voting. They are bringing up the argument that how are we supposed to safeguard our elections if we are not checking the identification of the people who are voting in them. And this isn't just a crazy, random, far-off concern. I mean, we saw under the Biden administration a mass influx of illegal immigrants, and then we even saw in the last election cases and stories of illegal immigrants being able to vote in our elections or just getting ballots sent to their homes. So, what else are we supposed to do when it comes to safeguarding our elections and making sure that we maintain voter integrity? I think when we look at voter ID, it's important to distinguish between the intention of voter ID laws as well as the practical outcome. So the practical outcome, some people would argue that they end up discriminating, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before we get there, I think we need to start with the intention of these laws. Are voter ID laws intended to be discriminatory? Well, like I just explained, no, the intention really is to uphold, again, that election integrity. And this is really something that all Americans and everyone in our government should care about. America is so unique and so different from other countries because here our voices matter. Your vote matters. We fundamentally elect the leaders who represent us into their positions of power and in office. Other countries who deal with a lot of corruption don't have this privilege. People might vote, but they know that their vote really doesn't count for anything. But in America, we have an orderly society, we have an amazing voting system, and at the end of the day, you can be assured that when you cast your ballot, it is going toward actually representing who you want to represent you in government. This means that no matter how small or insignificant certain cases of fraud may seem, they are super important because it undermines our very system of democracy, whether that be by taking away someone else's right to vote because someone is impersonating them and casting their ballot in place of them, or by granting that right to someone who is not eligible, who is not a citizen of our country, or who did not register to vote in accordance with the deadlines of their state. So then it is common sense that if you check someone's ID, you check their license or their passport or their birth certificate or whatnot, that you can be more sure that they are who they say they are and that they match the person who registered to vote and who has that ballot. So that's the intention. The intention is not nefarious. It is not what opponents seem to make it to be. The intention is truly just to safeguard our elections and really just to make sure whoever shows up at the polls is who they claim to be and that they have a right to cast the ballot that's being handed to them. But what about the practice? Because the intention is one thing, but then we move into the practice. Do these laws still discriminate against people and take away their rights so that they cannot cast their ballot in elections? I would argue no, and let me tell you why. If you think about it, we have to show identification all the time in society. There are so many things in life that you need an ID for. I've had to show my ID at the gym to get a gym membership. You have to show it, obviously, to buy anything alcoholic. I had to show it to buy a non-alcoholic beverage that was just like a fake wine drink that they still needed to see an ID for. I don't know why they had to do that. I think it was something with the system. But the general idea is you have to show your ID for so many things in life that it's not taking away your rights to ask to see your identification. For example, I went to a Walgreens one time because I had a package sent there and they would not give me the package without seeing my ID. Now, I didn't have my ID on me because I don't carry it with me if I'm not the one driving. And so I had to go home, pick up my ID and come back just to get my Amazon package, which is arguably so much less important than voting in an election. Or there was another time when my husband and I were at the bank and we were trying to make some changes on our account. And because I am a joint bank account holder, they needed to see my ID as well as his. And again, I didn't have my ID. This seems to be a recurring problem for me. And so we had to drive home, get my ID, come back and show it before they would make any changes. Now, in case you don't believe me and you just think, well, those are just one-off circumstances and other people may not be showing their IDs that much, listen to this list of other things that require people to show their IDs for: to apply for food stamps, to apply for welfare, to apply for Medicaid, to apply for Social Security, to pick up prescription medication, and to apply for unemployment benefits. These are all activities that I would guess opponents to voter ID would say that marginalized communities or low-income communities, or all the communities that they like to list who are affected by voter ID, that these communities need access to, right? Things like unemployment benefits or Medicaid or welfare. These are things that these groups often use because they use the social services offered by our country, and yet we demand to see ID in order for them to be able to enroll in them. So why is it not discriminatory to ask someone for their identification in order to apply for food stamps? It doesn't hurt low-income communities to ask them for it in that situation, but suddenly it's discrimination and it's taking away their rights when they show up at the polls, and we just want to verify that they are who they say that they are. But then it becomes more ridiculous when we take the logic even a step further, and that is that California asks for your identification when you register to vote. Directly on the California Secretary of State website, it says, quote, "The voter registration application asks for your driver's license or California identification card number, or you can use the last four numbers on your Social Security card." So California will ask you to verify your identification to register you to be able to vote, but then when you actually show up to vote, now suddenly it's discriminatory to ask to see that same ID that you had to present in order to register to vote. That is ridiculous and it makes no sense. Plus, opponents of voter ID will say that requiring identification is basically the equivalent of a modern day poll tax. They say it's the same as in the past when you would tax people to be able to cast their ballot. And so you are discouraging certain groups of people from being able to vote. But the data just doesn't support that. Take, for example, Florida. Florida has some of the strictest state voter ID requirement laws. They require you to show photo ID, which is arguably one of the more stringent requirements, and some states don't require photo, they just require other identification, but Florida does. And so they have some of the strictest laws. But with that, in 2024, they had the highest voter turnout that they've ever had in 30 years, with 78% of registered voters casting their ballots. On top of that, 95% of voters in Florida report that they have confidence in election integrity throughout their state. So it's interesting that a state with the strictest voter ID laws across the country also has some of the highest voter turnout and highest voter confidence across the whole country. So it is completely baseless to say that requiring voter ID at the polls is discriminatory, racist, and the equivalent of a poll tax. Identification is such a basic part of living in an ordered society, and the government asking to see your identification is such a basic ask of them for such a monumental task like casting your ballot to literally elect who is going to represent you in government. That's not a small thing. We should want to safeguard that and protect that and preserve that. Ultimately, we all know that this is true. We know that it's not discriminatory or racist, and we know this because Gallup conducted a nationwide poll back in 2024, right before the election, and 84% of Americans said that they supported requiring photo ID in order to vote. On top of that, 83% of those polled also supported showing proof of citizenship in order to vote. So are 83 to 84% of all Americans racist and discriminatory? Maybe some people would make that argument, but that is just completely baseless. We know that it's not true, and it's not even what the voters want. The voters want security, they want election integrity, and they want, again, to safeguard what is such an important part of our democracy. That desire on behalf of the voters does not seem to matter at all to California or to the California legislature, because we continue to beat the drum that voter ID will not be required across California and that it is wrong to ask for that. But while California is not listening to its own voters on what they want, We Heart Nutrition is listening to you on what you need in order to support your health and your body. We Heart Nutrition is a family-owned business right here in the United States that provides high-quality research-backed supplements in order to support your body and your health and enable you to live well. They are focused on what really works, using sustainably sourced high-quality ingredients and being third-party tested for purity and potency. But what really sets them apart is their commitment to giving back. They're not just here to sell supplements, they're here to support life in every way. So 10% of their sales goes directly towards supporting pro-life pregnancy centers across the United States. You know that when you buy supplements for them, you are supporting mothers and babies across our country who are in need. They are pro-baby, pro-mom, pro-life, and American-owned. So you can feel good about spending your dollars there. So if you're looking for a supplement company that provides a quality product, but that still shares your values and that their money goes to places that you want to support, then you should check them out today. Go to weheartnutrition.com/TessaAbraham to get 20% off your first order and to check out what they have. They have all the basics for men and women, so you should definitely go use my discount code TessaAbraham and you'll get 20% off your order. You'll support moms and babies in need, and you'll support the show. At the end of the day, why is it important that we're informed on voter ID? Yes, it's an important issue in and of itself. We should definitely be in support of voter ID. But even more than that, I think that it really provides a picture for us. It's a case study in how we need to make sure with our government and our leaders that we are not being bullied, lied to, or gaslit, which is exactly what's happening here. And when we notice that those things are happening, we need to question the motives of our leaders in government, and we need to demand real and effective change. Time and time again, leaders in California especially have made it out so that if you support voter ID, you're racist. You're in favor of discrimination. That's nothing short of bullying. Good governance cannot be done through bullying or through intimidation. It requires you to listen to the people who you represent and to assuage their fears, to address their fears. If you genuinely think that they're unfounded, explain why and help them through it. Don't just call them names and don't just use emotional manipulation tactics. A prime example of our government not doing this is with Representative David Min. He actually introduced Senate Bill 1174, which is the bill that passed last year in California that restricted voter ID requirements. This is what he said when he enacted the new law. Quote, "We cannot have 100 different city charters making up 100 different sets of voting rules based on fringe conspiracy theories." Did you catch that? David Min believes that if you are concerned about election integrity, you're just a conspiracy theorist and your fears are not valid and don't deserve to be heard. That's demeaning and downright untrue. You can't just call your voter base crazy because they are concerned about something that maybe you're not concerned about. Governor Gavin Newsom and the representatives of our legislature, again, should be addressing those fears. They should be doing everything possible to show why we can have trust in the elections in our state. Instead, they are just spreading lies. They're spreading the common narrative that there are so many people who just cannot afford an ID. They cannot afford to get to the DMV. That's just not true. That is such a small minority of people. And again, when voting is such a huge privilege, we should be willing to do what it takes to be able to prove that we are who we say that we are so that we can exercise that amazing right that we have. And just on another point, just think for a second that people fought and died for our right to vote. And here we are complaining, saying that we can't show up at the DMV, we can't catch a ride somehow to get there, we can't save up money even over the course of months to pay for the necessary fees to get an identification. This blatant disregard for the truth and to accurately represent the facts is just, quite frankly, unacceptable. So, no, you're not a racist if you support voter ID. And yes, our leaders must do better. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state. You can follow me on social media at It's Tess Abraham, and I'll see you back here next time for another episode of the California Conversation.